The sky over Tay Ninh province was a pale gray on the morning of September 1st, 1967, the kind of light that made everything feel exposed. Captain Robert Mason sat in the cockpit of his AH-1 Huey, hands resting on the cyclic, watching the tree line 200 meters ahead. Behind him, 8 infantrymen sat in silence, their rifles pointed down, waiting. Mason had flown this route 11 times in the past month. Every time the landing zone was hot. Every time they took fire before the skids even touched the ground. And every time the door gunners fired back with their M60s, suppressing what they could, while the Huey dropped fast and hard into the clearing. But suppression was not the same as protection. It was just noise and hope. Mason knew that better than anyone. He had lost 2 crew chiefs in the past 6 weeks. One had been hit in the chest during a hot extract near Cu Chi. The other had bled out on the floor of the cargo bay after a round tore through his leg above the femoral artery. Both times Mason had kept flying. Both times he had landed the aircraft. Both times he had gone back up the next day, because that was the job. But on that morning, something was different. There was another helicopter in the formation. It was smaller than the Huey, faster, and it moved through the air like it had been designed for a different kind of war. Its nose was narrow and pointed, its fuselage sleek, and mounted beneath its stub wings were rocket pods and a turret with a rotating minigun. Mason had never seen anything like it. None of them had. The radio crackled. "Chalk 1, this is Viper lead. We've got your 6. You're clear to approach." The voice was calm, almost casual, like the pilot was talking about the weather. Mason keyed his mic. "Copy, Viper lead. Descending now." He pushed the cyclic forward and the Huey dropped toward the clearing. The door gunners readied their weapons. The infantrymen tightened their grips on their rifles. And then, just as they crossed into the tree line's shadow, the jungle erupted. Muzzle flashes appeared in 3 different positions along the edge of the clearing. Green tracers streaked across the sky, cutting through the air just meters from the Huey's tail boom. Mason felt the airframe shudder as a round punched through the thin aluminum skin near the cargo door. One of the infantrymen shouted something Mason couldn't hear. The door gunner opened fire, the M60 hammering in short, controlled bursts. But the incoming fire didn't stop. It never did. And then, without warning, the new helicopter dove. It came in fast and low, its nose angled down like a predator locking onto prey. The minigun in the chin turret opened up first, a sound unlike anything Mason had ever heard. It wasn't the stuttering rattle of an M60. It was a continuous roar, a mechanical scream that seemed to tear the air itself apart. 6,000 rounds per minute poured into the tree line. The vegetation disintegrated. Branches shattered. Dirt exploded upward in clouds of brown and green. And then the rockets came. 2 pairs launched in rapid succession from the stub wings. They streaked forward in white trails of smoke and detonated directly into the enemy positions. The explosions were sharp and violent, sending debris high into the air. The incoming fire stopped, just like that. Mason pulled the Huey into a hover and set it down in the clearing. The infantrymen jumped out and ran for the tree line, weapons up, moving fast. But there was no return fire. No muzzle flashes, no tracers, nothing. The new helicopter circled once, low and tight, then climbed back up to altitude. Mason lifted off and turned north, heading back to base. His co-pilot, a young warrant officer named Briggs, was staring out the window, his mouth slightly open. Finally, he spoke. "What the hell was that?" Mason didn't answer right away. He was still processing what he had just seen. He had been flying Hueys in Vietnam for 9 months. He had seen door gunners fight for their lives. He had seen suppression fire from escorting gunships. He had seen close air support from jets and FACs. But he had never seen anything like this. This wasn't suppression. This was elimination. Mason keyed his mic. "That," he said quietly, "was something new." For nearly 3 years, the United States had been fighting a war in Vietnam that defied every conventional assumption about modern combat. The enemy didn't hold ground. They didn't mass their forces in traditional formations. They didn't engage in set-piece battles where superior firepower and technology could decide the outcome. Instead, They moved through the jungle like ghosts, striking fast and vanishing before American forces could respond. They used the terrain, the vegetation, and the weather to their advantage. They ambushed supply convoys, attacked forward operating bases at night, and laid traps along known patrol routes. And when American helicopters came to insert or extract troops, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army were often waiting. The AH-1 Huey had revolutionized air mobility. It could carry troops deep into hostile territory, land in clearings barely large enough for its rotor diameter, and extract wounded soldiers from places no fixed-wing aircraft could reach. But the Huey was not a gunship. It was a transport. Its only defensive weapons were the two M60 machine guns mounted in the cargo doors, operated by crew chiefs who had to lean out into the open air to fire. Those guns could suppress enemy fire, sometimes, but suppression was not destruction. And in the dense jungle of South Vietnam, suppression often wasn't enough. By 1967, the U.S. Army had lost more than 200 helicopters to enemy fire. Pilots and crew chiefs were being killed at a rate that shocked even the most experienced commanders. Landing zones were becoming death traps. The Viet Cong had learned to position their heavy machine guns in overlapping fields of fire, creating kill zones that even the most skilled pilots couldn't avoid. The Army tried to adapt. They armed some Hueys with additional weapons, creating the UH-1B and UH-1C gunship variants. These helicopters carried rocket pods, grenade launchers, and multiple machine guns. They provided escort for transport Hueys, flying alongside them and engaging enemy positions during insertions and extractions. But the armed Huey was still a transport helicopter with weapons bolted on. It was slow. It was heavy. It was vulnerable. And it couldn't carry enough ammunition to sustain prolonged engagements. Pilots who flew armed Hueys described it as trying to fight a knife fight while carrying a refrigerator on your back. You could do it. But it wasn't what the machine was designed for. What the Army needed wasn't a modified transport. What they needed was a purpose-built attack helicopter. Something fast, something agile, something that could survive in a high-threat environment and deliver overwhelming firepower exactly where it was needed. They needed a weapon, not a workaround. And in September of 1967, that weapon arrived. The Bell AH-1 Cobra was unlike any helicopter that had ever flown in combat. It had been designed from the ground up for one purpose: to kill. Its fuselage was narrow, just 38 inches wide, creating the smallest possible target profile. The pilot and gunner sat in tandem, one behind the other, rather than side by side like in the Huey. This arrangement reduced the frontal area and improved aerodynamics. The cockpit was armored. Not heavily, but enough to stop small arms fire and shrapnel from most angles. The seats were armored. The critical systems were redundant. If one hydraulic system failed, the other could keep the aircraft flying. If the main rotor took hits, the Cobra could still maneuver long enough to get out of the kill zone. But the real difference was in the weapons. Mounted in a turret beneath the nose was an M28 chin turret system. It carried either two M134 miniguns or two M129 grenade launchers, and it could rotate and elevate independently of the aircraft's flight path. The gunner controlled it from the front seat using a helmet-mounted sight that tracked his head movements. Wherever the gunner looked, the turret pointed. Wherever the turret pointed, destruction followed. The stub wings carried 4 hard points. Each hard point could mount a rocket pod, typically a 7-tube 2.75-inch rocket launcher. With all 4 pods loaded, the Cobra carried 28 rockets. Each rocket could be fired individually or in salvos, depending on the target. And because the Cobra was fast, faster than any helicopter the Army had ever fielded, it could get to the fight quickly, deliver its payload, and get out before the enemy could react. Its top speed was over 200 miles per hour in level flight. In a dive, it could exceed 220. For comparison, the UH-1C gunship maxed out at around 120 miles per hour. The Cobra wasn't just faster. It was in a different category entirely, but speed and firepower meant nothing if the pilots didn't know how to use them. And in September of 1967, nobody did. The first AH-1 Cobras arrived in Vietnam without a proven doctrine, without a standardized tactics manual, and without any real-world combat data. They were sent straight into active combat zones with crews who had only a few weeks of training on the new aircraft. The Army's plan was simple: learn by doing. And that's exactly what happened. The first combat missions flown by the AH-1 Cobra were cautious, almost tentative. Pilots treated the new helicopter like an armed Huey, flying similar profiles and using similar tactics. They stayed high, conserved ammunition, and avoided prolonged engagements. But that approach didn't last long. On September 4th, 1967, just 3 days after the first Cobras arrived in country, a flight of 2 AH-1s was called in to support a platoon of the 1st Cavalry Division that had been pinned down near the Cambodian border. The platoon had walked into an L-shaped ambush. Heavy machine gun fire was coming from 2 reinforced positions in the tree line, and the American troops were trapped in an open rice paddy with no cover. They had already taken casualties. The platoon leader was calling for immediate air support, and he was specific about what he needed. He didn't need suppression. He needed those machine guns destroyed. The 2 Cobras, call signs Viper 11 and Viper 12, arrived on station within 6 minutes. The lead pilot, Captain John Davis, established radio contact with the platoon leader and got a quick brief on the enemy positions. Davis had flown armed Hueys for 8 months. He knew how these situations usually played out. The gunships would make a few gun runs, firing rockets and machine guns in the general direction of the enemy positions, hoping to suppress the fire long enough for the troops to move. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But this time, Davis had a different aircraft. He pushed the Cobra into a shallow dive, accelerating toward the tree line. His gunner, Warrant Officer Michael Torres, acquired the target through his helmet sight. The chin turret tracked smoothly, locking onto the first machine gun position. Torres squeezed the trigger. The minigun opened fire. The sound was unlike anything the soldiers on the ground had ever heard. It wasn't individual shots. It was a continuous roar, a mechanical scream that seemed to shake the air itself. 6,000 rounds per minute poured into the tree line. The vegetation disintegrated, trees splintered. The enemy position simply ceased to exist. Davis pulled up slightly and fired 2 rockets at the second position. They impacted within 2 seconds of each other, sending plumes of smoke and debris into the air. The machine gun fire stopped. Viper 12, piloted by Captain Richard Hayes, rolled in behind Davis and delivered another volley of rockets into the tree line, ensuring that nothing remained operational. The entire engagement lasted less than 90 seconds. When it was over, the platoon leader came up on the radio. His voice was shaking. "Viper 11, this is Bravo 26. I don't know what the hell you just did, but you just saved our lives. Enemy fire has completely stopped. We're moving now." Davis didn't respond right away. He was still processing what had just happened. He had been in combat for 8 months. He had flown dozens of close air support missions, but he had never seen anything like this. The Cobra hadn't suppressed the enemy. It had obliterated them. Finally, he keyed his mic. "Bravo 26, glad we could help. Viper 11 is off station." He pulled the Cobra into a climbing turn and headed back to base. Torres in the front seat was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but clear over the intercom. "Sir, I think we just changed the whole damn war." Davis didn't disagree. Word spread fast. Within a week, every aviation unit in the 3rd Corps knew about the Cobra. Pilots who had been flying armed Hueys wanted to transition immediately. Infantry commanders who had been skeptical of helicopter gunships suddenly became believers. And the Viet Cong, who had grown accustomed to engaging American helicopters with relative impunity, began to realize that the rules had changed. The Cobra didn't just provide fire support. It dominated the battlefield. It could arrive faster than any other helicopter. It could hit harder. It could stay longer. And it could survive engagements that would have destroyed an armed Huey. By the end of September, the Cobras were flying multiple missions every day. They escorted troop transports, conducted reconnaissance by fire, provided cover for medevac helicopters, and hunted enemy supply routes along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They worked in pairs, using overlapping fields of fire to ensure that no enemy position could engage one Cobra without being exposed to the other. The tactics evolved rapidly. Pilots learned that the Cobra's speed allowed them to use terrain in ways that had never been possible before. They could fly nap of the earth, hugging the contours of the landscape, then pop up suddenly to deliver a rocket strike before the enemy could react. They could brake hard and fast after an attack run, using the Cobra's agility to evade return fire. They could coordinate with forward air controllers, artillery units, and infantry platoons in real time, adjusting their tactics based on the situation on the ground. But perhaps most importantly, they learned that the Cobra changed the psychology of the battlefield. When the Viet Cong heard the distinctive sound of a Cobra's rotor system, higher pitched and faster than a Huey, they knew what was coming, and in many cases they chose not to engage. Enemy troops who would have opened fire on a Huey often held their positions when a Cobra was overhead, knowing that revealing their location meant near certain destruction. This shift in enemy behavior had ripple effects across the entire theater of operations. Landing zones that had been hot became cold. Casualty rates among helicopter crews began to drop. Infantry units operating in high-threat areas requested Cobra support specifically, knowing that the aircraft could provide protection that no other platform could match. The Cobra had proven itself, not in training exercises or simulations, but in the most demanding combat environment imaginable. And it had done so almost immediately. But the Cobra's success came with a cost. The aircraft was not invincible. On October 12, 1967, an AH-1 Cobra was shot down during a low-level attack run near the village of Duc Pho. The pilot, Captain James McKinley, and his gunner, Warrant Officer Daniel Freeman, were killed instantly when a 12.7mm heavy machine gun round struck the aircraft's transmission, causing a catastrophic failure. The Cobra crashed into the jungle and exploded on impact. There were no survivors. It was a stark reminder that speed and firepower could not eliminate risk. The Cobra was a weapon, and like all weapons, it was operated by human beings who could make mistakes, encounter bad luck, or face overwhelming odds. McKinley and Freeman were the first Cobra crew to be killed in action. They would not be the last. Over the next several months, more Cobras would be lost to enemy fire, mechanical failures, and accidents. Pilots would be wounded. Gunners would be killed. Aircraft would be damaged beyond repair. But the losses were far lower than they had been with the armed Hueys. The Cobra's armor, speed, and agility kept more crews alive, and the missions kept coming, because the demand for close air support in Vietnam was endless. Every day, somewhere in South Vietnam, American troops were in contact with the enemy. Every day, helicopter crews were called to provide fire support, escort transports, or hunt enemy positions. And every day, the Cobra proved that it could do the job better than anything else in the Army's inventory. By the end of 1967, the first batch of AH-1 Cobras had logged thousands of combat hours. They had fired tens of thousands of rockets, millions of rounds of ammunition, and thousands of grenades. They had supported operations across the entire theater, from the Mekong Delta to the DMZ. They had saved lives. They had destroyed enemy positions that would have taken days to neutralize with artillery or airstrikes, and they had fundamentally changed the way the U.S. Army fought in Vietnam. The legacy of the AH-1 Cobra's arrival in Vietnam extends far beyond the war itself. The Cobra was the world's first true attack helicopter, a platform designed from the outset to dominate the battlefield through speed, firepower, and survivability. Every attack helicopter that followed, the AH-64 Apache, the Russian Mi-24 Hind, the European Tiger, the Chinese Z-10, owes a debt to the Cobra. The lessons learned in those first few months of combat shaped the development of rotary wing attack aviation for the next 50 years. The Cobra proved that a dedicated attack helicopter could change the outcome of ground engagements. It proved that close air support didn't have to come from fast-moving jets that had only seconds to acquire and engage targets. It proved that rotary wing aircraft, with their ability to hover, maneuver, and loiter over the battlefield, could provide a level of precision and responsiveness that fixed-wing aircraft simply couldn't match. And it proved that the pilots and gunners who flew these missions were not just transporters or observers. They were warriors. Veterans who flew the Cobra in Vietnam speak of it with a mixture of respect and affection. They remember the way it felt to push the aircraft into a dive, the way the minigun sounded when it opened fire, the way the enemy positions disappeared under the impact of rockets and bullets. They remember the missions that went well and the missions that didn't. They remember the friends they lost and the soldiers they saved. And they remember the moment when everything changed. The moment when the Cobra arrived and the battlefield was never the same again. Today, the AH-1 Cobra is still in service with the United States Marine Corps. More than 55 years after it first entered combat, the Marine Corps operates the AH-1Z Viper, a heavily upgraded variant that bears little resemblance to the original Cobra beyond its basic configuration. The Viper has modern avionics, advanced targeting systems, composite rotor blades, and far more powerful engines. But the core design philosophy remains the same: a narrow fuselage, tandem seating, speed and agility, overwhelming firepower. The Cobra that arrived in Vietnam in 1967 was a gamble. It was rushed into service with minimal testing, no established doctrine, and crews who had to learn how to fight with it in real time. But it worked. It worked because the aircraft was fundamentally sound. It worked because the pilots and gunners who flew it were skilled, brave, and adaptive. And it worked because it gave them a weapon that could finally match the demands of the war they were fighting. In the years since Vietnam, the attack helicopter has become a fixture of modern warfare. They have been used in every major conflict, from the deserts of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan, from the jungles of Central America to the urban battlefields of the Middle East. They have evolved, becoming faster, more lethal, and more survivable with each generation. But the fundamental concept, a rotary wing aircraft designed specifically to hunt and destroy enemy forces on the battlefield, began with the Cobra. And it began in the skies over Vietnam in the hands of pilots, and gunners who flew into danger every single day, knowing that their survival depended on their skill, their aircraft, and each other. The morning light over Tai Ninh province is different now. The war is long over. The jungles have grown back. The landing zones where helicopters once descended under fire are quiet now, reclaimed by nature, but the memory remains. The memory of the day when a new kind of helicopter arrived and everything changed. When suppression became destruction, when hope replaced fear, when the battlefield for the first time in years tilted in favor of the men on the ground. That change didn't end the war. It didn't bring peace. It didn't erase the losses, but it gave the soldiers who fought there a fighting chance. And in a war where every advantage mattered, that was everything. If you want to hear more stories from the Vietnam War, stories of courage, sacrifice, and the men who faced impossible situations, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share as there are more missions waiting to be told.
In the Vietnam War, the sky was not a safe place. Every mission was a gamble between coming back or vanishing.